So at the moment I'm writing an album of music that's influenced by film and game scores. This one I wanted to do a kind of a Dune type piece that's not directly influenced by it, but after going and seeing the new Dune film I was like, yeah, do you know what, the music and the sound design is amazing in this. I want to have a little go at something that captures a similar tone. What I've ended up with is a little sort of big BRAAM meets brass kind of section. And then I've got this throat singing section, which is influenced by a scene in Dune 1. So the idea of this video is just to play you the track and then break it down for you, just so you can see how I put it together and hopefully inspire you to go and do similar things. So let's have a listen. Okay, so first of all, let's focus on this intro sound. I've used Collision, which is a physical modelling synthesizer that comes with Ableton. It's got 2 resonators, and to be honest, I just had a play with it, found sounds I liked. You get to move this around. I added the noise here as well. So I just had to play around with it, basically, just trying to find. Basically, what I was looking for is something that felt like a real instrument being played, and my ultimate goal was to have something that felt like metal scraping. So if we listen to the track without the processing on. Now that's quite high pitched. It's not what I was looking for exactly, but I didn't want to pitch it down. So what I ended up doing was adding Manipulator by Polyverse. I've actually got 2 versions of it. So one of them I've pitched down 2 octaves, messed around with some of these other functions here, and I've got the wet dry signal modulating up and down. And what that's doing, and I've got another one here actually, another one here with another extra little pitch down and just less wet mix. Let's focus on this one. This one really adds a kind of the feel of like an anvil scraping the ground. So let's listen to it now. And once we add in the reverb, yeah, so yeah, there's some EQ and some other bits in here, but that's the kind of main bulk of what I'm doing here. Now I just want to quickly listen to this bit. So I use Opus, which is East West's sample player. It's similar to Kontakt, except it's just the in-house sample player for East West orchestral libraries. For £20 a month, I get access to their entire library. So I can just search in here anything I need, and I'm finding that very, very, very useful. Versus Kontakt, where I've just got a few bits here and there that I use, and I've been using them for years, and I want something new. So I've used that a few times in this project, but I wanted a kind of Middle Eastern sounding stringed instrument. So I just got that little bit there, which I added. Now I want to look at these Ratchet sounds. I've called them Ratchet. That was the kind of word that came to mind. Let's listen to it again. See, I really like that. In Dune, there's a few times where the percussion is doing that kind of twisting, building up sound. It sounds like a kind of cogs turning or something like that. Let's listen to the original sound before I put any processing on it. It's very different. It's actually like a nice, quite a high-end sounding tappy bit of wood or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but very different to what I've ended up with. Now, I literally think I typed in Ratchet on Splice. And this is one of the sounds that came out. So I don't know why the word ratchet, there must be a reason why ratchet came into my head. I'm thinking of those things that you can kind of turn in your hand. Ratchet. Maybe that is the right word. The fuck knows. But that's what I typed in, and this is one of the first sounds that came up. Now, so I've taken all of these plugins off, and I'm going to add them one by one just to show the processing that I've gone through to turn it into that very high-pitched woody sound all the way to that deep twisting cog sound. Right, so I've got the M spectral pan here and the auto pan. With the spectral pan, I just drew in a random shape, to be honest, and I thought that sounds good. It's basically panning the frequencies that I'm drawing in here, left or right. So simple as that. I just liked. There's no kind of scientific method here. I just drew it in. And then the auto pan, I've just adjusted the rate and the amount so that it feels like it's kind of panning from left to right as the sound plays. Now, the sound has a bit of reverb on it that then cuts off. Now, I'm going to want to add my own reverb at the end. So what I've done is I've used the transient master to completely reduce all of any of the tail. I put a bit of an attack on there as well. I've got the Native Instruments driver. Now, originally, I picked this. I could have picked any saturation or distortion plugin, to be honest. But I picked this because if you turn the res up, you get this feedback scream. And I was playing around with that at first, but then actually when it came down to it, I was not feeling that for this. So it's actually just adding a bit of drive. It's quite gentle, so I could arguably not have it in here and you probably wouldn't notice, but it's just a little bit of grit. I then put another transient shaper on there because I wanted to reduce the reverb even more, and that drive did bring some of the reverb out again. So that's drying it up even more. Now let's have a look at Pitch Monster. So one is pitching it down by 24 semitones, and the other one is pitching it down by 36. The mix is quite low on this one, and then it's much higher on this one. And that starts to add the depth and the low sound that I'm looking for. But it also gives it this sort of, because I put the jitter on, it's not like there's a slight delay in it. So let's have a listen. Now without. Let's put that back on. Yeah, so you can hear already that's quite a big element to this sound and why it sounds like that. And now I added this orange vocoder on, and it's adding an extra kind of low end layer. Then got this pitch loop plugin. Let's listen to it with that on now. Let's turn it off. Let's turn it on again. Yeah, so you can hear that it's adding this extra layer in the sides. And this was just me messing about, to be honest. I kind of just came across that and was like, let me try that. And I liked what it did. Then I've got Valhalla Supermassive, which is giving it a bit of delay. And it's like kind of adds on top of that pitch loop one. See, now actually it's starting to sound like it's in a space. There's a very short reverb tail on there, and it's now feeling like it's in a room or something. And finally, or almost finally, we've got the convolution reverb. Now, I've used this reverb, this setting, throughout the track. Occasionally, I'm putting the low end up as an effect on the sound, and I'm really liking what I'm getting there. Or sometimes I'm bringing some of the highs and lows down, just depending on the sound. Now, I've also just got a bit of EQ and compression on the end, so let's listen to it now. Lovely. And I have automated the wet dry signal of the reverb. So it starts off, it starts off dry and it fades in. And that's just because at first I had it just all the way up the whole time, but I liked the crankiness and the dryness of it at first. Okay, so let's do one final play of it with the effects off. And on. Yeah, so I think this sound I had a blast putting this together because it just shows that you can find a sound that it's got elements of what you want for that final thing that's in your head, but you have so many tools that you can play with to manipulate it. And as long as you know what tools to go to, or at least you have an idea. I mean, some of these things I just randomly picked, and I was like, oh, this might sound good, and I liked what it did. So just play around. It's just a good example of manipulating a sample to make it sound like you want it to. I'm going to skip forward in the track, and I've got these 3 sounds here. Now, these 3 sounds, I've basically copied the same effects chain from the first Ratchet, made a few modifications, and added on here, and they basically made these sounds sound amazing. So listen to the 3 of them dry. So we've got 2 flute sounds and then this bird sound. Now let's listen to it with the effects chain on. Yeah, so quite different. I don't need to go through all this again, but it's essentially the same effects chain with some alterations. I've got the reverb here, but I've put the low end of the EQ right up, and that was adding loads of boominess, which I felt like the sounds needed, because they are just like these thin flutes otherwise, and that worked. I just want to highlight the bird sound actually. So let's listen to it before the effects chain, and then with the effects chain. So it's like transformed it into this alien voice, or like a kind of ancient. It felt very Dune-y to me, like this ancient voice. And then one final effect that I've copied the same chain again here, made some changes. I got rid of the reverb because I just wanted it dry. And now this is the sound that plays at the end of the track. Let's have a little listen to it without the effects. And now that is the sound of someone zipping up a bag and then a crow at the end randomly. It sounds like that because I've stretched it out, and then this is it with the effects on. Yeah. So again, you can manipulate sounds to make them. You can make anything sound crazy, and I love doing that. It's so much fun doing it. Okay, so let's focus on this sort of middle BRAAM horn section. Let's have a little listen again. Okay, so this part is made up of only a few layers. So we've got phase plant. This is a sound I made in phase plant. That's the kind of BRAAM sound, or at least it originally was going to be that kind of typical BRAAM sound, but I ended up going in a different direction. But we'll look at that in a sec. We've then got the brass. Now this is from the augmented brass plugin from Arturia. That's really good because you've got live brass in there, but you're able to manipulate it quite a lot and add loads of layers, and you get something far more interesting and far more interesting. And we've got a couple of percussion bits. These bits are nice. Again, these came from Opus. Again, I just looked for sort of more kind of Middle Eastern drum sounds and sampled them and used them. That's literally all I did. Yeah, so you got a few things like that. Then you got this one. And you can see I've just used that final hit a few times. I mean, this one's had a lot of processing on. Let's have a listen to it without any processing. What I ended up doing was actually copying the effects chain from the Ratchet sounds, and then I turned off the panning, and I've still got the transient master in there, driver, transient master again, and I got rid of the pitch monster plugins, etc. I put wormhole in here, which is, how do I describe this plugin? I can't remember how to describe it, but I use it on percussion a lot. I find it transforms it, makes it sound weird. It does crazy stuff. I can't remember like how to describe what the process. I don't know what the processing is behind this thing. I just know it sounds good. So I added that in there, but only like 50%. Well, just less than 50%. So you're still getting the dry signal. So still got the supermassive on here, and then the reverb again. I've done some EQing, brought the low end up, some of the highs off. Multiband compressor again, and then I've just monoed the up to 120 hertz. Yeah, that's the processing of that anyway. Again, you know, I've got this sound is like the sort of drum I was looking for, but it just had no weight to it, and like no grit. So this processing has added all of that. This is my patch in phase plant. Let's have a listen to the sound again. So I've got wavetable here. The envelope here is going through the wavetables, and I've got another one here. It's doing the same. Then here I've got two more wavetables, I was just adding a bit more texture to the sound. Plus a saw wave that's the phase here, and the harmonics are being modulated by this LFO, I believe. Yeah. And that is, I've put that down 12 semitones. So that's adding an extra low, deep grit as to the overall sound. I could break this all down, but essentially, let me mute Let me mute this group and this group. So let's just listen to, let me just turn the effects off and let's hear what it sounded like with nothing else on. I'm going to leave the reverb and EQ and compression on, etc. there, but just so you can hear the sound with just the original, the first wavetable and none of the effects on within Faceplant. So you can hear already that's quite brassy, and that's what I was looking for. And the main thing that's happening here is this curve. You see it goes up, stays solid, and then goes back down. That is pitch bending the entire patch, and that's what gives this that's what that happened. That BRAAM sound has that kind of pitch bend. But I kind of started off here and ended up just adding another wavetable that kind of gives it an extra layer. And then this final group here, let's see what it sounds like with that. Now this saw wave is giving it extra low end, and then these two are quite subtle, but they're just adding a bit of fuzz in there. I've then got a couple of effects here, and this was just me playing around really. A resonator there, bit of fuzz and drive from that. Comb filter. So the mix is quite low on there, so it's quite subtle, but the amount is being modulated by an LFO, and not the amount, sorry, the frequency is being modulated by the LFO, and that just sort of kind of adds a sort of light kind of comby phase sound through it. Then I've added a bit of overdrive, and the mix again is modulated here by the curve and the envelope. And I've got this filter here taking out some of the high end, and I've linked it to this filter cutoff, so the filter opens up as the note plays. And yeah, and that's that sound basically. I've just got some reverb on it again, EQ, compression. So here we've got the augmented brass. For this, I found a preset that's already sounding quite big and bold, and I then adjusted the parameters, changed the type of brass being used, and just basically manipulated it to sound actually what I wanted it to sound like. So I exported that to audio, done some EQ, compression. I've ended up fading in the first note because I felt like I wanted this Faceplant sound to come through more, but once they're both on top of each other, you can't really distinguish one from the other. And I felt like it was going from this intro sound to this like quiet bit here, straight into the brass. It just felt a bit too much. You first of all just hear the Faceplant, and then the brass fades in, and then the second note is the brass and Faceplant together, and it just kind of felt a bit more impactful. That was just a choice I made. So that's that section. As you can see, it's very basic in terms of layers. It's just a couple of big sounds that have been processed, and I forgot to mention actually with the Faceplant sound, I did add this chorus assemble and also this chorus as well. It just added some more depth and width to the sound, basically. Okay, so moving on, let's have a look at this throat singing section. All right, let's look at the throat singing. So I found this throat singer on Fiverr, and he was very cheap, and he delivered within 24 hours. I sent a request one evening, and the next morning, I think it was, or maybe like early the next day, he had this, and I was like, that is perfect. Basically, this section is influenced by a scene in Dune 1 where there's this throat singing chant while the I can't remember the name of them. The bad guys are all getting ready for battle, and I love throat singing anyway. High Lung are a group that you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't, you should check them out. I absolutely adore their music, and one of their vocalists is a throat singer, and it's just incredible. And I actually end up taking influence from their music throughout here, because I added a frame drum and some sort of strings and some sounds. Basically, I'll go into that, but I've got some sounds here that are influenced by their music. So it kind of starts off being influenced by this scene from Dune, but then it turns into something influenced by Heilung and that kind of Scandinavian Viking music, they say, but that's a shit term. Now let's break down the throat singing. This is the throat singing before there was any processing put on. Now this is with the processing. Right, the bulk of this is compression, compression, compression. So I saw a interview with Hans Zimmer talking about the throat singing scene from Dune 1, and he was saying that he'd had this recording of the throat singer, and he ended up just messing around with it, adding tons of compression and doing some time stretching and stuff, and that's how he came up with this kind of twisted, weird language that he comes up with, and this like really like bold, thick sound. So I just stole that idea really with this. I just put 3 multi-band compressors on, just slammed it with upwards compression on there as well. And it just, every time I'd added one of them and I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Then I was like, let me add another. And then later on I then added a third, and yeah, it just every time you add one, it made it sound much more crisp and just gnarly. Now, I've got manipulator on here that is just slightly on there, and I've pitched it down 1 octave basically, and that's just adding extra bass and low end to his voice. He's already quite low, but it's added like a more sub frequency here. So he's singing in A. So this is another an A 1 octave down. So I actually automated the wet amount to come up a bit. So I just wanted to kind of pump it up for the second round. And that adds, you're going to hear that low end more. That kind of adds this growl to it. Let's listen to it with the wet all the way up. So I've got that's in there, but it's fairly subtle. You wouldn't really notice it unless I showed you, to be honest. But you assume it's just part of the voice already. So some EQ there. There's some more EQ. That was I think this one. Yeah, this one is just bringing out that low A there more, and then putting a bit of a dip on this A because that was peaking a bit much. And got the reverb on there. So same reverb as before, but I've taken out some of the low and the highs. I just found it was messy. So taking out those frequencies kind of just worked basically. And yeah, and then we get the throat singing. Okay, I just want to explain the rain. That's from the scene in Dune 1 with heavy rain and this loud throat singing. So that was me just copying that idea, and it adds this textural layer that, because all that's going on here is the throat singing and the hit of the drum occasionally, at least until we start adding layers. But adding that rain in there really just kind of adds this atmosphere and fills up the space. It's kind of like white noise in a way. I copied the collision from the beginning. I copied the track and then made a new version where I'd taken out much more of the low end and low mids and adjusted some of the parameters. Let's have a little listen to it. And it adds this kind of almost like bowed sound to it. And this is very high lung. There's a lot of these sounds I'm adding now are very high lung. Yeah, and I've got this frame drum here. I think they're basically like a traditional, animal skin type drum. That just comes in to give a nice regular rhythm underneath the vocal. I then added this string drone, which is a sort of stringed instrument you might hear again in this kind of music. Just a bit of reverb on there, some EQ, and then some panning, so it's slowly kind of going left and right. And that was just a choice I made that I felt worked for the mix. And then finally, I've got this little shaker sound that goes on top of the frame drum. I've got a little crow in here as well. Again, very high lung. So that is that. That is the track. That is all the layers. I hope you've learned something from this, or at least been inspired by it, because I think you think that you listen to orchestral music or cinematic music, and it's quite daunting. But I think this demonstrates that you don't need a ton of layers. You don't need a full orchestra. You don't need to do a lot really to get something cool. I mean, bear in mind I did get a throat singer for this, but it was, as I said, didn't cost much. I had the results within 24 hours, and I'm very happy with it. So yeah. Please like and subscribe if you like what you're watching, and finally I'll be exporting some of the sounds and presets from this track, which will be available on my Patreon, and the link's down below.